Hello, and welcome to It Starts With a Question. I'm your host, Crystal Williams, president of Rhode Island School of Design. I'm a poet, essayist, and daughter of Detroit who is curious about how others experience the world and how their unique experiences shape how they move through it. Throughout my life, people have often told me that they feel like they can tell me anything. I think that's because, at root, I seek connection and deep understanding. Maybe it's the poet in me, but I've always been most interested in learning about the why over the what or how, so we can crack open the core of the matter and get to the heart of what makes us who we are. For me, it starts with a question, so we might learn what else do we dream for this human project.
It's so good to see you.
Today, I'm chatting with award-winning author, illustrator, and New Jersey native Brian Selznick, who cannot remember a time when he was not drawing and making things. During his time at RISD, Brian thought he'd become a set designer for the theater, but a job designing window displays at a children's bookstore in New York City took him in an entirely new direction. Among Brian's best-known works are Wonderstruck, The Marvels, and most recently, Run Away With Me. So, when we first met, you were receiving an alumni award, and you had on a really fabulous suit with power shoulders. And then today, I'm looking, and you've got on your rainbow socks. So what is it with the shoe sock thing, Brian?
A little bling is always nice, and I think, honestly, I think part of it is that I'm actually kind of a shy person, and but I like being social.
Yeah.
And I think when you wear something that catches someone's attention in the right way,
the kind of attention that you welcome.
It opens up conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think shoes can be a fun way to do it, but I'm also interested in contrast. So it's not all bling, that there's a little of this, a little of that. So I like, jeans, regular leather shoes, and some bright rainbow socks.
What is the most interesting conversation that the shoe sock bling has ever brought on?
That's an interesting question itself. I think part of it is it's about being in a social event and feeling afraid to start something, and then being open to having people start a conversation with me, because I think when I'm working, I'm very much about initiating conversations and finding out things that I need to know.
Digging around.
But being able to be open to what's coming at me, I think maybe naturally I'm a little cut off sometimes, or I'm afraid of being cut off. So it just helps me keep that door open. So it's kind of like a general sense of openness that I find is very helpful with that.
You use the word shy, and I'm interested in that. Have you always been shy, and are you an introvert?
I think most people who actually know me would be surprised to hear me describe myself that way, because I love doing things, I love going out, I love people, I love parties, but there's that thing that happens, I think, with a lot of people where there's that disconnect between what we're feeling inside and what we're presenting on the outside. So as a little queer kid in New Jersey, I had my art, and that made me powerful in a way that I think I wouldn't have been otherwise. And so because people knew I could draw, they didn't make fun of me or bully me in a way that they may have to someone who was exactly me, the shy, lonely, skinny, without the drawing. And so I think that's maybe where some of that started.
Were you aware of that as a kid? Like that the drawing really set you apart and was a kind of protection?
Yeah, I think it became most clear in high school, and middle school. In kindergarten, I was aware that I could draw because I would draw, just draw. But the other kids would gather around me and look.
Oh, how lovely.
And that made me feel good. And then my kindergarten report card actually says, Brian is a good artist.
A+.
Right, so there's proof.
It's
official. And then I think by the time I was in high school and I was painting flames and skulls on the football players' helmets, I was aware that people were interacting with me who were not interacting with my friends, and who sometimes were bullying my friends.
But they were not bullying you because you had this special thing that was of value to them.
Yeah.
And of value to the whole.
Yeah.
I think quite a lot about being a queer kid. Mm-hmm. When we were kids, queer kids, this was not easy for kids who were queer.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's easy now, but I'm interested in how you think about, I mean, your most recent book is about this little boy, right? And how do you think about the experience, the difference in experience? Are the experiences different?
I think, like you were saying, like it's always hard for a lot of people to grow up queer. And amazingly, it's easy for some people in some areas, in some families, in some communities, which is incredible. And that probably was true as well in the 70s and 80s when I grew up. There probably were places where it was easier, but I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and I did not know anybody was gay. I mean, like in history, like I didn't know that was a thing. There was a report on 60 Minutes one evening about like the homosexual, and I remember hearing about that. So I was aware by 6th or 7th grade that I was attracted to boys, and I knew that was wrong, or I felt that was wrong. And so I dated some girls and tried to not be gay, but I surround, like, I don't know, like I look back and when I imagine what my high school bedroom looked like, it was covered in posters for bands like Culture Club and the Village People, who I later found out all were gay.
And with whom you felt some sort of distant affinity.
There was something. I couldn't have named it at the time. I had a Wizard of Oz poster on my wall. I loved musical theater. I did not know that these were things that are also beloved in many parts of the queer community. It took coming to college, it took coming here to RISD and then doing theater up at Brown to discover that essentially everything I loved was queer. So I think one of the differences, is even if you're growing up now and you are in a very difficult situation where your family, your family may not support you, your community may not support you, you feel like America doesn't support you because that's what's happening.
Prone and actually in physical danger for a host of reasons.
The difference is, I think it would be hard to find a child who doesn't know that there is a queer history and a queer community out there. That now, because of the internet, because of what's happening in the world, we are aware of some version of a larger landscape that I had to grow up and discover. I don't know if that's better or worse or easier or not, but it's different.
It is different. So in thinking about the differences that we were just talking about and thinking about your body of work, what is your aspiration for your work?
It's interesting because my first instinct is to say I want people to like my stories, right? Like I want there to be characters that you can relate to. I want there to be stories that you enjoy reading. I didn't consciously do this, but I think my works they're mysteries. Like I write mysteries. Right? And I like the idea that I set up something that you and the character and the story don't know, and then by the end of the book, you generally get to find out what has been going on, right? You're unearthing something. And early in my career, like after I had done, 5 or 6 books, the first of which, the Houdini box, started as a project here at RISD, a friend of mine asked me if I thought my work was queer. And at that point,
that's interesting.
At that point, I had no characters who were gay. I had, the Houdini box has a 10-year-old boy who's obsessed with magic and Houdini like I was, and he has no father. He has a mom, but no one was queer. So I said no, and he laughed in my face. He was like, Brian, your first book was about a kid who wants to escape from anything, like closets. Like he can, like that, like you are a queer person.
Yeah.
Therefore, everything you make
Yeah.
is queer. And just suddenly, like, I reassessed the books I had been doing and what I was interested in, why I was interested in them. And of course, they're all related to me as a human being. What am I curious about? What is it that I want to make? Yeah. And central to who I am is my queerness, which the idea that it was hard for me as a child, that it was where pain or a source of pain, eventually I was able to realize that's what gave me the ability to see two things at once, to be on the inside and the outside of something at the same time.
Yes, that's right.
And that's a gift. That's something of value. So it wasn't until the Marvels, which is, I did The Invention of Hugo Cabret 15 years later, maybe 10 years later from this story, and then Wonderstruck, and then The Marvels. And The Marvels was the first book I did with actual out queer characters. And I imagined that the two adolescent boys in Wonderstruck, the previous book, who have a very, very strong friendship, I imagine one of them would grow up to be gay and one of them would grow up to be straight, but that's not part of the landscape of the narrative
sort
itself.
Of in the background.
Yeah, sort of how I think of those boys. With Run Away With Me, I've got two 16-year-old boys falling in love with each other, and I'm inside the love story. So ultimately, I think it's very much about the ability to find yourself inside of a story and to be seen. Like, and Run Away With Me is actually about a boy who feels like he has never been seen before. So when he meets this kid who really connects with him, there's a moment where he actually talks about having felt invisible until he meets this other boy who then sees him.
Who sees him.
And I think that is something that I have felt myself in many different ways. And I think and again, like, a book about queer people isn't just for queer people,
No,
right?
That's right. It's a book about humanity.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons I generally don't write about people today, or especially teenagers today, is because I don't think I could possibly understand what a teenager's life is like today. So when I'm writing about this book takes place in 1986, right?
Times we know.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's times we know.
Yes.
And then if I'm writing about something earlier, I'll do some extra research.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I'm writing about the human qualities, like the desire to be seen, to be loved, to have a family, to feel safe.
Span time. They cross time.
I believe they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to this. Well, two things. One, was the question that your friend asked you an inflection point for you? I mean, did it open a new way of thinking about your work and its relevance, or how actually people interpret the work? So there's that question. The other question is about the boys who that's amazing. Like, do you think about ever revisiting them in their adulthood?
That's interesting. So first question. Yes. Inflection point. And I think it might have been more of an inflection point for me as a human being than it necessarily was for my work.
Yeah.
But me as a human being and my work are the same thing. Yeah. So it totally changed the way I thought about everything
like what you were doing. Did it make it heavier?
No, that's a really good question. I think it made it lighter. I think because I understood something that felt beautiful, it felt meaningful, it felt powerful, and when that happens, I have a sense of being in the right place, doing the right thing, and that is more of a sense of ease.
So before that question, you wouldn't say you were at ill ease.
No,
right.
You
weren't at ill ease.
No.
But this thing, you were sort of easy, a little easy. But after the question, you were totally easy.
I think this question probably came right around the time I first came out to my parents. So I think I probably had already come out to my parents by this point. So I was out to my friends. I came out to my parents when I was 26. The Houdini box was published when I was about 26.
Yeah.
And I think that I was feeling comfortable. I hadn't ever been in a serious relationship. I had some shorter, smaller relationships, but I wasn't in a relationship. I didn't know what being in a relationship was really like. So queerness was more about who I was attracted to and learning about the community and learning about and fun, right? Like going to dances and parties. And of course it was also like the height of the AIDS crisis, so it was also protesting and going on marches and things like that. So it wasn't all fun, but it was about there was a sense of of purpose. And so, but I wasn't out necessarily in my job. Because I was invited to a ton of schools to talk about my work, and I traveled all over the country, and I never directly spoke about being queer because I wasn't dating anyone, so it wasn't like me and my husband or me and my boyfriend XYZ, and my books weren't explicitly about queer issues. So after a certain amount of time, I began to notice that when I was talking about my work, it was about the stories and the process and things like that. There was no queerness in my talk with the young people. And it wasn't until many years later when I was with my husband and we had both gone on research trips when I was working on my book Wonderstruck, that I made a conscious decision that every talk I ever gave, whether he was part of the story or not, I would out myself. I would say my husband and I.
Really? Why?
Because I felt like it was very important to do so, and it is very important to do so.
But important why?
Because people need to know that there are queer people everywhere. And there are kids in that audience who are in the closet who don't know that the person they're talking to is queer. There are people in that audience who are hearing that gay people are bad and that it's wrong to be gay, and I want to be able to stand up and say it's not. It's natural, it's normal, it's okay.
And by the way, I've been married 29 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is a serious thing.
It's a serious thing.
It's a very serious thing. I mean, technically, I've been with my husband 29 years.
Yeah, sorry, you've been married.
I've been married for shorter than that because of making it legal.
Yeah.
But yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I am in a successful relationship.
To normalize.
Right. And again, there's both the normalization, which I think is really important, and the appreciation that being queer is on the outside of what's considered normal.
Yes.
And both of those things I find extremely important. And I think sometimes for young people, it's important to lead with the normalization. And then I think as they grow older and have more complicated thinking, there's ways in which to talk about how the yin and the yang of that are important. So as a young queer artist, I was generally not ever consciously talking about being queer, but I wouldn't have described myself exactly as being in the closet publicly, but technically I was, because I wasn't talking about it.
But your friend's question suggests that you were in the closet and everybody else was on the other side waiting for you. Was like, come on, 'cause we see you, brother.
Yeah. And that, and it felt like an invitation to see things in a different way, to step out in a way that was very welcoming. And again, it was a funny moment when he laughed in my face, and it was a little jarring because he's kind of a funny, jarring person.
Yeah.
But to be able to recognize that who I am is infused into whatever it is I'm doing felt right.
So what's interesting to me about this is I am not queer, but so much of what you are saying in relation to the totality of who you are and how you make and why you make and how you talk about identity and why you do that. I think about as a Black woman, right? And I think about it in relation to the poems I write or used to write, right? And the reasons that I explore race and class and isolation, alienation are to understand, but also to normalize and to make more possible for people who look like me or who had my experience. You know, Toni Morrison used to talk about writing the stories that she wanted to read as a kid, right? And it sounds to me like there's a level of that for you. Like you are writing and illustrating the stories that as a kid would have been very valuable to you. Is that true or no?
No, I think it is true. And I think being able to make something that is both for people like us, so that people like us see themselves in what we've experienced.
That's right.
And then what we're making is also for the people who are not like us.
Yes, that's right.
Right? So they can say like, oh, this is what that experience is like, that and this is what's different.
Yes.
Which I can never experience because I'm not that specific thing.
Yes.
But also, like, what are the parallels?
Yes.
And where is the empathy that brings us together as human beings and brings us together as members of minority groups that are seen in different ways by the majority, right? By the quote unquote world. And I think that is very much what I imagine, I want to have happen with my work. But I keep thinking about myself as a kid and the idea that if I saw my own book with two boys kissing on the cover, Run Away With Me has two boys kissing on the cover, I would have run in the opposite direction because I would have been terrified that someone would have seen me being interested in that.
But that's the Brian of 1972.
Yeah. So am I making that book for that person? I think my book is made by that person, right?
Yes,
so it is.
Yeah.
But then I think about someone like me now, and the idea that
going to it like
So now this book exists on that table for you to go and be brave and pick up, because sometimes it is an act of bravery to pick up a book, that you feel secretly connected to. Not for everybody, but for some people, that can be something that is a real act of bravery. And I like the idea that I am making things that are saying, it's okay, like, come, be brave. I have made this for you.
What a gift.
Thank you. Yeah, and I feel like that's a big part of what we do. Like, we are able to make gifts. And I think, as a poet, as a writer and artist, I think, and everyone at RISD, like the desire to send work out into the world, right? Like, we're not all Henry Darger, like sitting in an attic making work just for ourselves. We are making work that we want people to see. We want to share it. And there has to be a reason that we think someone would want to see it. And it's not just to say, like, look what I can make or look what I can write. There has to be something in it that says, this is for you. This is a gift that I want to share with you. And I think that's exciting.
I think it's exciting, and I agree with you. I think the act of being an artist is one of the most gorgeous acts of gift giving and of being of service, right? That it is it is a courageous act for sure, more so now I think than ever, probably in at least in our history that I hear. It's taken me decades to understand that. As a 20-year-old writer, I wouldn't have thought that I was giving something. Even when I was doing spoken word, I understood really acutely, like that there was a profoundly important living interaction between the writer and the audience. And that is, as I'm performing, I am shifting and changing because there's a mutuality in play. I understood that. And I did understand that some of what I was writing to help open doors, open space, create space for young girls especially who were like me, right? I had that sense. I also had the sense that I was trying to make space for people who were not like me to make space.
Yes.
Right? Yep. Like, you guys are taking up all the oxygen, and I need you to understand that, and then cut it out and let all of us into the space. But I wouldn't have. It's taken 3 decades for me to sort of pull back enough and have enough experience and maybe even grace to sort of characterize it in the way that I now characterize it. And it may also be the case, like I have been an arts advocate and now I'm president of this incredible school, and I can see the work that other people are doing in those terms. I do. I have a question. Are any of your books banned now?
I don't know.
God bless you.
I don't know.
And why don't you know?
Partially because I haven't specifically asked, I suppose, but I also haven't heard that anything is being specifically banned. And again, my new book with the 2 boys kissing on the cover may be pre-banned by people who just aren't buying it. So then you're not going to ban something you don't own. But I haven't heard any direct stories yet.
The reason I ask that is because we were recently in a conversation with Grace Lynn.
I love her work.
Is amazing. Yeah. And what's interesting about her story is it is similar to yours in that, although we haven't talked about like your reading life as a kid and so forth, but when she's a kid, there weren't images of people like her in anything she was reading, and the images that her mother was able to find for her, the books, were sort of old Chinese fable books. And Grace has a way of thinking and talking about not really liking the quality, and the images weren't really, she's an artist like you, right? So this, along her trajectory, this history she's pulling along, and she realizes, I want to create stories about people who look like me. And the stories actually don't always have to be, to your point, about Chinese, Taiwanese experiences or cultures, but the people look, right? And so we were talking, and she blew me away with her commitment to this sort of advocacy work. And what also blew me away was that some of her books that simply have characters that are of Asian descent, but the content has really nothing to do with culture or race. Those books, just because the protagonist is a person of color, have been banned. Which I find unbelievable on some level and deeply, deeply disturbing.
Yeah, because what fascinates me about the book banning, or one of the things that fascinates me, is how much power people still give to the idea of the physical book. And this simple ancient technology is treated by the folks who are afraid of us as having some kind of huge talismanic power. And the idea that you're not, I can't remember who said it, but someone has talked about the idea that, like, they're not banning the book, they're banning the people in the book. They're banning the ideas in the book, of course, right? It's a white racist kind of heteronormative desire to make pretend that no one else exists. It's a way to be violent without directly, at first, hurting people directly. But you are hurting people, and we know where book banning ends up. It ends up with people actually being hurt. And so they're not separate issues. Book banning is abuse. It is the abuse of human beings. And I think that the fight to make sure that books survive is the fight for all of us, and the fight for decency, and the fight for what is right, and the fight for knowing that we exist. And I think one of the things that's so extraordinary about this very challenging moment we're in is that there are more people conscious of wanting to support minorities and women and people of color and gay people than there ever were before, right? Like, we're not all going to disappear. You can take the bisexual and the trans issue off of the government websites, but bisexual people and trans people aren't suddenly going to vanish. Like we've always existed, because that was the other big thing that was a huge discovery for me, was that we've always existed, right? And they talk about like, oh, suddenly there's trans people when there weren't trans people before.
It's like the ahistorical quality of this moment that we're in. Is
it's another form of violence.
That's right.
And the idea that trans people have always existed. It's just we have a million more words now.
That's right.
So suddenly we can, as children, hear these words and be like, oh my God, that's who I am, or that's who I think I am right now, and I want to explore that. Where in the past, the two words we had were sissy and tomboy.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and most people didn't call those things themselves. They were called that by other people. So there was often shame around it, maybe less so for some tomboys than for some sissies, but some sissies, I'm sure, embraced the sissiness of the sissy. But as a kid, that's not easy to do.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And so the language has changed and the understanding has changed, and that's not going to suddenly disappear. I'm friends with David Levithan, who is an amazing author and advocate and editor and writer, and he helped found the Authors Against Book Banning, and he talks about the thousands and thousands of books about queer people and people of color that are being published all the time now.
That's right.
And you can't get rid of all of them.
That's exactly right.
And I think there's value in that thought.
Yeah, I do think that there's value in that thought. What I am seeing, the chilling effect, however, is really disturbing to me, because it is reaching into all kinds of corners. And so even people who identify themselves as progressive and inclusive are sort of pulling back from their stated values in ways that are troubling. And so we know that there is a level of, that there is success, that there are successes being had.
Sure. And and the self-censorship is a real thing, and it's all happening because of fear, right? And I get it. Like a lot of stuff that's happening now it's dangerous. Like it's really, really scary what the potential is that for our own personal lives, what could happen if we are now seen as being against what the government is for. You know, like it's a very, very dangerous moment. And I understand the desire to self-censor and to step back, but that is what we have to be aware of, and we have to fight against as much as possible ourselves. And you know, to your point earlier about feeling like, I think a lot of artists are told when they're young that that's frivolous, right? Like you need to do something real. Like, you know, that's why arts are often removed from schools or not taught, because there's this idea that it's not an actual job. You know, my dad was an accountant, and he was very concerned about money, as many parents are, whatever their job.
You're going to go to art school, and then what job are you going to have?
What job are you going to have?
Yeah, that's right.
And and again, real, actual issue. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But the idea that art isn't a job is not a real thing.
That's exactly right.
And the idea that art isn't of value and that art isn't of importance. And you look at the way people who are censoring folks attack the arts and attack stories being told in all these different ways. Like art is valuable, it's important, and apparently it's really scary to a lot of people.
Yeah, and very powerful.
Yeah.
So at this year's commencement, I talked a bit about a quote from Howard Thurman, the theologian, who there's a wonderful quote of his from which I take this meaning, which is that you can measure the power of a people by the intensity with which others try to oppress them. Now, that's not exactly the Thurman quote, but that's what I take from it.
Yeah.
And I said that.
That's
it, right? Yeah. And I said that to these young artists because I wanted them to understand that the thing that you all do is so powerful. If it were not important, if it were not essential, no one would care. No one would be banning books. No one would be cutting arts funding. No one would be threatening the foundations of what it is that you all are doing.
Yeah.
So do more of it.
Yeah.
Do more of it.
Amen.
Understand the power and understand the collective power.
Yeah.
it was really important that they now Thurman was talking about race,
Right.
right? And he was talking about civil rights. But this is true for artists. It's true across.
Yeah.
If you don't matter, then no one's going to pay attention.
Right.
But if you're being paid attention to, then something is going on here.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that these ideas, these big ideas, are really important to hear. They're really important to figure out how to internalize. But it's also important to remember that they're not always easy to actually believe, even for ourselves.
Yes.
When you're sitting at your desk and you're drawing and the world is on fire outside,
That's right.
it can feel like this
doesn't matter.
It doesn't
this
matter.
Is too small.
And that doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't go away really. Like I feel versions of that a lot. Oh, I do, absolutely. Like I find myself having to fight that idea to remind myself of the very thing that I'm interested in doing. Like I'm telling, especially now that I'm telling stories specifically about queer people, like I'm very aware that this is the time to be telling them.
Yes.
And Scholastic, my publisher, is supporting my telling of them. They sent me out on the road for 2 months to talk about this book. Like it is, I'm fully aware of how important this is. Yeah. And I still feel sometimes when I'm sitting at my desk, and especially because, like, as all artists know, it doesn't always go great.
No,
the work.
It doesn't always go great.
Right? Sometimes
the page stays white.
Sometimes the page stays white. Sometimes it's you can't figure out the next part of your story.
Yeah.
Sometimes the colors aren't working. The shading isn't good.
Yeah.
And that's hard enough, like or it would be hard enough, like in Paradise, you know, where everything is golden and you're on the beach all day and it's beautiful. But like when the world is on fire, that feels exponentially more insane and bad. Yeah. And I just have to remind myself that that it's okay to feel all these things, to feel all and to go out and protest when you need to protest,
and on some level inconsequential.
Yeah,
like in the face of the magnitude.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really gorgeous, brilliant, young, creative people. And they are making work in 2025, in the middle of all of this. What advice do you have? Like, what would you say?
I had to give a speech recently to booksellers at the end of a bookseller convention, and I was told it had to be inspiring.
Oh, this is the worst word ever.
I was like, oh my God.
It's the worst word.
And I had a bit of a panic.
Yeah.
And then what I ended up saying was, I can't be inspiring to you, but I can tell you what I need to hear myself.
Yes, brilliant.
And I need support. Yes. I need to know that what I'm doing matters. I need to be in a community of like-minded people. I need to know that I am doing something that is mattering to someone, that I am helping someone else in whatever fashion is, for me, ultimately the meaning of all of this, right? And like I have had the good fortune of making things that have inspired other people to make things. Like I've had my books adapted for film. I've written things that other people have just made songs from, or like there's
You have a proof point that your work is impactful.
But even more so, what's impactful is knowing that I made something that inspired someone to make something that wouldn't have existed if I didn't make what I made. So that sort of chain of creativity is passed on. And I have often felt that watching another artist make something because I made something is in fact kind of more satisfying than making something myself, and making something myself is very satisfying, right? Like it's for all the pain I just talked about and all of the difficulty that we all know as artists and writers and thinkers, the moment when I finish a book and I know I have made the book I wanted to make, that's how I know I'm done.
It's like the thing. this is good.
It's like I
like this.
I know it's good.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not dependent on what other people think. It's nicer.
You are satisfied.
Right. It's nice when other people agree with you.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's the satisfaction of knowing I made the thing I wanted to make.
But you brought all of the tools to bear that you needed to bring to bear to make this thing.
Yeah, and I had one idea, usually 3 to 5 years earlier, and I was able to make that happen. Yeah. So that is something that I think it's also a little bit about like how we forgive ourselves as well, which is a really difficult thing to do, especially in a burning world where we feel like we should be like we always should be doing something else or something more or something, in some other way. But for me, again, like the kind of the moment where I'm not giving advice, I'm saying this is the advice I need to hear from myself. I know I need to forgive myself. I need to remember that when I'm at my desk and it's not going well, it's not because I'm a bad artist. Like I still think that. Like I have a really good career. Like I've made a lot of really good books.
It's a laudable career.
Like I've had these wonderful experiences, and I still sit at my desk sometimes and feel like I'm not good, or I'm not, or I can't, or so those challenges are there.
I remember a conversation with you some months ago. We were talking about these external conversations. It's so many. And we were talking earlier about the difference between when we were young and 2025 and being a teenager. And the internet is a big difference. And I see visual artists, often young people who are at RISD and other places, on the internet, and it's great because they can see work that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. They can't just travel all over the world, but now they can see.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the internet is also full of likes, and the dark side of likes, which is silence and not likes. And there's, people do dumb down, but almost never really. So I wonder how you think about the internet in relation to creativity these days.
Yes. I joined social media very late, and the only social media I've ever had is Instagram, and I had to quit that in most cases because it was making me actively feel bad about myself and my work most of the time.
Interesting.
Because it's designed to make you feel like you're comparing yourself to everyone else. And even comparing myself to like people who I love. And I'm like, what am I doing? And so I had to find my own way to navigate that, which for me is posting about my work, because it's important to get the word out there. But I can't scroll, and I can't I don't look at any, I don't comment. I post and I get out. And obviously that's what works for me, and everybody needs to be able to do whatever they do. And do I mess up on that and sometimes scroll? Yeah, of course. Of course. It's designed to be addictive. But I think we have to figure out ways where we feel like we're using the internet, not that the internet is using us. Yeah.
So what's interesting to me about that is on drop-off day, the 500 and some odd students and their parents all sort of bustle into the old church. And it's, hot, and people are fanning, etc. And I'm asked to give some thoughts, offer thinking about the experience, etc. And one of the things that I say to young people and their parents is, you're coming into this incredible space of exceptional makers. And you're going to be tempted to compare yourself, because almost every one of them has been the best artist in their school or community, right? So we've got a community of the bests. And they're going to be tempted to compare themselves to others. And the only comparison that I encourage them to make is to compare themselves today to themselves yesterday.
Oh, that's so good.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because any of the other comparisons in my experience as an artist and a teacher, leads you down a really dark road.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
It doesn't help. And it can hinder. Just personally, I know in my own experience as an artist, my own trajectory, I spent about a decade in a kind of mild depression behind the comparison of my own work and my own career and other people's. And it was only until I shed the comparisons and really only focused on those questions that you were talking about for yourself. Is this the work? Do I feel confident about this work? Have I brought the tools to bear? Have I said the thing that I need to say?
Yeah.
That was for me where freedom, like where artistic freedom emerged. Like, right, I don't care about what you're doing. This is what I am doing. This is what I'm trying to do. And I'm interested in doing this kind of wacky thing over here. And I'm whatever. And so that feels important to me for young people to think about and to know.
Yeah.
And to know that, you know, someone like you, even with all of the success you've had, sits in front of that paper, that white space, and there are days when you're like, ugh.
If you're going to acknowledge the idea that that is real and it doesn't go away, then for me it became about, okay, how do I handle this? Like, how do I experience it? So for much of my life, it was people would ask me about my process, and it would be a story of woe. It would be a story of pain and difficulty and how hard things were, and, you know, and pleasure in finishing the book and having those few moments where something goes right. But it was a tale of woe, which when you're talking to a room full of artists, generally can be very exciting to them because, like, oh, I felt bad too. Yeah. But right after the pandemic began to open up again, I went to my first art opening, and I met this woman who was an artist, and I said, how are you? And she said, I'm great. And I was like,
how did you do that?
I was like, what?
Yeah, what's the juice you're drinking? Yeah.
I said, what do you mean? And she said,
what do you mean? Great.
And she said, well, I have this beautiful studio, and I always used to walk into it feeling worried about my work and like things like weren't going to go well. And one day I walked in, and the sun was streaming in. There were all my supplies. And I just thought, why do I feel bad all the time? Like sometimes it goes slow, and sometimes, but I'm so happy to be here. So I looked at her.
I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah. So I looked at her, and I was like, I'm going to do that. so you know,
great.
It's a little bit like a Jedi mind trick. You know, the idea that it's at least the way what that meant to me.
Yeah.
Was rethinking how I tell my own story. So instead of telling the story the way I was telling it, I then told other people and myself, I love what I do. I have this great job. I get to sit and I have these amazing moments where I figure something out, or those beautiful coincidences that happen when you're working on something that make you feel like you're on the right track and you get the exact thing you need. But then there are long periods of time that are very difficult and very painful, right? So I'm not denying that. I'm not making pretend that doesn't exist. It's part of the story, but it's not the lead.
It's not the whole story.
Right?
It's not the most important.
Right. And I can remember, Brian, this is part of your process. It's okay. Like if you need to take a nap, if you need to go outside, it's okay. And it's not that it always immediately or automatically feels great suddenly. No. It just takes a little bit of the self-flagellation away, which is one of my big problems, and I think it's something a lot of artists can relate to. But again, it's the advice for myself, which is stop beating up on yourself so much. And I'm not going to get rid of all the sadness. I'm not going to get rid of all the frustration. That is a real part of my process. But I don't have to. I always say there's feeling bad, and then there's feeling bad about feeling bad.
Yes, that's right.
I can't necessarily do something about feeling bad, but I can do something about feeling bad about feeling bad.
Yes.
So that taking away that whole layer still leaves me feeling bad, but but it's not worse.
That's exactly right.
And that I can get through, and then something happens eventually.
That is beautiful advice to young people. It's it's actually
just to me.
It's great. No. It's great life advice, right? It's great life advice. Yeah. It's been so lovely. I could talk to you for hours and hours.
Can we just keep going? Let's just keep going.
No, we should just keep going.
All right, after the cameras are off, we'll keep talking.
We'll keep talking. Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you.
It's been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Brian, for joining me for this conversation. I'm still thinking about how our unique identities powerfully inform and define our work. Join us next time for more inspiration and insight on It Starts With a Question. In the meantime, keep up with Brian on Instagram at @Brian Selznick and follow me on Instagram at Crystal Ann Williams. Learn more about RISD at risd.edu.